e3. I don't want to leave this diagonal open. The one strength that he has is that he has this good diagonal for his dark squared bishop. If I play b3, then this diagonal stays open. Who knows? Somehow the queen gets down here. It can cause me all sorts of problems. He plays a6, and now it gets a little tricky for me. I clearly have an advantage. I think I could offer a draw any time probably, but I'm not interested in a draw over here. I'm interested in trying to convert this advantage. And converting this advantage will all be about the c-pawn. The c-pawn is a passed pawn. The b-pawn eventually and the a-pawn, that's perhaps, but the c-pawn is a passed pawn. He has nothing in the way. Slowly I'm going to have to march up the board, all the while being careful not to be not to get in trouble to queen forks, not to get in trouble to perpetual checks, etc. So I played f4, strengthening this side. I know for sure that I'm going to want to play on the queen side, but I need to strengthen this side. This pawn was hanging as it is. I could have moved the bishop right away, but for example, if I move the bishop to here, if I move the bishop to d4, and then he trades it off, if I take it back with the pawn, then I isolate the d pawn, and it's no longer a passed pawn. And if I take it with the rook, then the other pawn. I'll show you rather than just saying that. If I, for example, I had to protect this f pawn. So if I move my bishop over here, then he can simply take it. If I take this, well, then this pawn is no longer passed because it has to worry about this pawn, and this pawn becomes isolated. And if I take it with the rook, then of course this pawn hangs. So obviously I can't do that. So instead I played f4. I'm sorry, and then I played f4. Then he plays a5. He could have gone to a5 in one move, but he's stalling and hoping that I just won't have any good strategies for advancing. Now I'm ready to play bishop d4. I realize that lets him come into my territory with his queen. Well, I already did that with the previous move, but that's fine. I need to really trade off the dark squared bishops if I'm going to I don't have to trade off the dark squared bishops, but trading off the dark squared bishops will allow me to start trying to convert my advantageous endgame. He decides to trade them off. Bishop takes d4. Now, he could have moved the bishop, but you realize that wherever he was going to move it to is going to be an inferior square. If he put it over here, it's hemmed in by my f4 pawn. If he puts it over here, it's hemmed in by his own pawn, and even if that pawn moves, he's not going to have any great spaces to put it in. So there's really nowhere he can move that bishop where it's going to do a very solid job for him. So he figures he might as well trade it off. Then I play rook takes d4, and here's where it starts to get tricky. I have a passed c-pawn, I have two rooks against the queen, but I have to always be careful about the perpetual check. King g7 he plays, trying to get it in. Again, a slight mistake. He probably should have put the king along on the back rank. I play rook d7, trying to threaten this pawn and get it to the 7th rank in general, which is a good idea. Queen g2, threatening the h-pawn. I use the other rook. I don't want to bring back this rook, and then he goes back, and the position is the exact same as it was before. Obviously, I'm not interested in drawing over here. Queen g1 check, which I'm fine. I play queen c2. Remember, he has no other pieces to support the queen, so the queen can't do anything. If the queen comes down here to a1, I simply play a3, and there's really nothing he can do. And in fact, the queen would then be trapped, probably a couple of moves away from doing anything, and the queen would be in bad position. So he plays queen e3, keeping it centralized. Rook d4, a centralizing move. Keeping my rook, I realize, I can't take this pawn because it's obviously protected by the queen. At this point, I'm not going to get greedy. I'm not going to try to take pawns. I'm not going to try to threaten to take this pawn. I don't need to take any extra pawns. If my rooks go on pawn hunting adventures, or go on adventures trying to harass his queen, they separate from themselves, they become weaker, they leave the other rook more susceptible, and they leave the king more susceptible to a perpetual check. When you're trying to convert an endgame, don't try to win more. It doesn't matter how much you win by. As long as you have one more pawn that you can queen, you win the game. Important mistake I see people make. They think, oh wow, I've got two rooks, let me go get all the other guy's pawns. You can leave yourselves open to some problems that way. He plays king f8. Again, that previous move, king g7, was probably a mistake. Probably not that much of a difference. Now I play c4. Now I'm going to start to march that c-pawn. I have to start it eventually. Might as well do it now. Queen e6. He brings it back. Again, very careful. I don't want to try to thrust it forward. If I try to thrust it forward and it's unprotected on the c5 square, then I make it more vulnerable. So instead, I play a3. Again, I want to trade off this pawn. That's perfectly fine. I don't need to capture that pawn. I just trading it off is perfectly good. He plays king g7. The king's going back and forth. He's probably waiting for me to make my move. He doesn't really see any improving positions. Making a pawn march on this side of the board is not going to be too successful at this point. Really, I think what he's doing is he's daring me to try to go ahead and prove that I can convert my advantage without opening up myself to a perpetual check. Really, a perpetual check is his main hope over here. I play b4. Trading, I would love to trade off that pawn, get two passed pawns, and hopefully eventually queen one of them. A takes b4, a takes b4, queen a6 wants to come around. He wanted to open up the a file to come down here and try to get a perpetual check. I saw that. Queen b3, again preventing him from putting a check this move. Every move I made, I was doing calculations 4 or 5 moves down the road to see if I could prevent how many checks does he have. Does he have 3 more checks? Does he have 4 more checks? Or does he have an infinite number of more checks, which means that would be a draw, obviously. Queen a1 needs to get into my backfield over here, so to speak, to borrow a football term. But I calculated that I would be able to defend against any checks, so I played c5. Queen b1 check, that's his only hope, perpetual check. King a4. See, if I keep it over here, if I keep my king over here, he can well, he can't. Maybe he doesn't have another check this move, but he would be able to maybe threaten this pawn. Maybe as long as I keep my king in this box over here, he can probably keep checking it. But now I'm going to try to get my king in front of my pawns. Remember, as long as my rooks are lined up with each other, I don't have to worry about them being captured. Queen a1 check. King b5, get it in front of the pawns, so he puts it back. Queen a8. Now I can continue my pawn push over here. The king is, I'm getting closer and closer. c6. So then again, his only hope is his only check. Queen b8 check. King c5. I don't really have to worry about this check over here because I can simply move here. His only check is this. If I play this, and then he comes here with his only check, I move here, and I don't think he's going to be able to check me too much more. This would be his only remaining check at this point. I play this, and he's got no more checks, and I've got only two spaces to go. Queen, and obviously win the game. So instead, he plays e5, trying to get the queen in from the other angle. Of course, I have no choice. F takes e5, queen takes e5, rook d5. Again, the rooks are still lined up. I realize his checks are running out. Queen c5 check, and where can the king go over here? Well, not to b6, even though that would get it in front of the pawn eventually, because then this pawn hangs. King b5. Now he's got no checks, no immediate checks. h4. No reason why not to take it. G takes h4. Then king h6. Again, I guess he's hoping eventually if he can just hold out long enough to make a pawn, although the truth is the king can't go anywhere over here, probably just a desperation move. Rook d4. Why did I do that? Because I don't want to have to defend this pawn. Obviously, I don't want this pawn to hang, and I also I want the king to be able to move, and also I want to be able to play rook c4 if need be. I'm not thrilled about getting the rooks on different on different ranks and different files because I want them to be protecting each other, but if need be I will. He plays f5, figuring he might as well start a pawn march of his own. What this does, actually what he did before was probably set up a pass pawn on the f file. And what it does is it basically says, all right, look, you're winning, but you'd better prove that you can queen that pawn because or else I'll queen my pawn. Rook c4. I have a box. Notice I have a little box between my rooks and my pawn. This rook is not defended, and this rook is only defended by the king, but that's fine because he needs checks over here. Queen h8, trying to obviously he saw he had no other checks, no other threatening moves behind, so get in front of the pawn. c7. Now it's only one move to queen. Again, the temptation is great to move the king out of the way and try to get him defended by the other pawn, but it's not necessary. And the more moves I allow him, the more possibilities that I can slip up into a perpetual check. Queen c8, defending 8th rank. Now, again, the temptation is great to put the rook over here, but that really wouldn't work out too well. Remember, this rook is now no longer defended. If he puts a check over here, obviously I can't move my king over here because then this pawn hangs. And if I move my queen to this file, then he forces me back basically. If I go like this, and then he just keeps going back and forth. And if I play here, then he can just play queen a7, and when he comes down here. Whoops, excuse me. Okay, thank you very much. And I play over here, and he can keep going back and forth, and it's going to be tough for me to get out of these checks. So again, getting these rooks separated is what would have been my undoing if I had done that. So instead, rook c6, getting the rook in front of the king, so that when even if he manages to check me, I've got these rooks bunched up over here. Queen b7 check, that's his only check. King c5, again, and really he's got one more check if he puts the queen a7, that's his only check, so I simply play what I was planning to do from before. King d6, putting it behind the rooks, behind the pawn. He's got no more checks. The pawn is going to queen next move, and so therefore he resigns the game. Please feel free to post any comments, and thank you very, very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.